Welcome to the Design Thinker podcast, where we explore the theory and practice of design. Hosted by me, Dani, and
me, Peter.
Hello, Peter.
Hi, Dani. How are you?
I am good. How are you?
I am fantastic. Thank you. Great to be here with you again.
Yes, I am excited for this episode.
Me too. Me too.
As I am for every episode. I think our listeners are probably like, she's always excited.
This one has been brewing for a little while. We've talked about recording something on this subject, for a while. And I think it's been brewing. And I feel like it could go in a couple of different directions as ever. But I'll do my best not to turn into a rant episode for me. Not fully, but what are we going to talk about, Dani?
Is it even our podcast if Peter doesn't have a rant?
There's a difference between a rant and a ramble.
Okay, so I usually ask you, what are we talking about today, Peter?
Okay, I see what you did there. Today, Dani, we are going to talk about productivity.
Yes. Sorry, my reaction is, I know we were recording this episode today, and then this morning I do my usual going through the news articles and scrolling through things. And I don't know if the technology spies are that there were about 5 things that popped up. So either this episode is very timely or my device is listening into our conversations.
Or of course, as you well know, Dani, or you just happen to be paying more attention to the word productivity and you're seeing it more than actually being there. But exactly. One of those 3 things. Yeah.
One of those 3 things. So lately, if you've been watching the news or some of the business conversations that are happening globally, productivity is down.
Yeah.
Is basically the headlines.
Yeah.
So I thought, being design thinkers and social scientists that we are, we should unpack let's start with what do we mean by productivity, and then explore what are some of the root causes, how might we hack this productivity problem. That's what I thought we could talk through today.
Yeah, nice. What's the headline problem that we're seeing in the news? And then maybe this is where the rant will go for me, but is that actually a problem? Or how might we reframe or redefine that problem? And then, what are our thoughts or solutions, and how, as design thinkers, how might we go about tackling the problem of problems? Okay.
Normally start with a definition.
Yeah. Which definition of productivity are we going to start with, Dani? That's a loaded question there, but...
So the basic definition of productivity is the ratio of output to input, right? So what are you getting out of the time that you're putting in? So for example, let's say my job was making t-shirts and I spent 8 hours a day making t-shirts. The output, the productivity would be measured by looking at how many t-shirts have I made in a day.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's very, very basic way of explaining what we mean when we say productivity.
Yeah.
How much are we getting out for what we're putting in?
It's really nice and simple. Really nice. Can't be any simpler than that. Where my mind went to was, excuse me, especially because of the news and governments, businesses, the economies around the world, but in particular because some of them are not as healthy as they have been in the past. This idea of productivity is a headline in a lot of news at the moment, and the economic productivity, that GDP, for example, as a measure of productivity. And this is, I'll save it for later, but that's where my rant can start to come in. And this idea that, humans that are part of a society and an economy, that can start to feel like our only purpose is to, holding my hands up and doing inverted commas and air quotes for the listeners, to be productive. And I think there's an interesting conversation to be had around what does that really mean? And if you take that to its extreme, then where does it lead us? And is that actually the best measure we can actually have in the year 2025? So when we're recording it, in case you're listening to this later, or let's describe it as a successful, healthy, sustainable human society, planet, etc. But we don't have to go down that particular path, Dani. Maybe this is to say that your simple definition is absolutely right. And if we extend it into GDP in one direction along the spectrum, maybe kind of lifting it, taking it up and abstracting it, then I feel like that can be less helpful. Whereas if we extend it downwards or along the spectrum into personal and individual productivity. More recently in my life, I've discovered that there's a lot to be said and gained from paying attention to this idea of productivity. And from an individual personal point of view, it can be extremely helpful to consider it.
From an organizational science perspective, we always look at things at the three different layers, right? And the three different layers is the individual, the team, and the organization. But you can actually take that same framework outside of the organization into the broader context of the world and say individual, organization, community, world, country, or community, country, world, city. So basically, productivity happens at multiple levels. And today it'd be really great to look at productivity across different levels. I also think there is a question that is looming that is not being talked about that's worth mentioning, but I don't think we should dwell on it too much because I think the philosophical question around productivity at the moment is productivity the right measure in 2025? Productivity really made sense when most of us worked in factories. Most of us made things that could be easily measured. But in our current world, most of our work is much more complex than I put 8 hours in and I get this out.
Yeah. I made 80 t-shirts in 8 hours, and that's easy to. You took the materials that make up t-shirts, you turned those into t-shirts, and you got a bunch of t-shirts at the end. Yeah, really easy to measure both the input, the time, and the output. Yeah.
But if you have a team that is working on, let's say you have a team that's working on figuring out, okay, we've got this wonderful product and we need a strategy to launch it globally. How do you measure product? Because that team could spend 8 hours on that and not have an output to show for it because the output won't really be able to be measured until the product is launched. But there is all of this knowledge work that has to happen. Crux of the question is, how do you measure productivity in a knowledge-based economy? Because the output isn't directly related to the input.
Yet the output is often intangible. You can't actually look at the pile of t-shirts you've made at the end of the day. Even, and I'm sure that there's definitely answers to this, that let's say you're part of the team that's working on the global marketing strategy for the t-shirts. Ultimately, the business's success lies on the number of t-shirts sold. But their contribution to the number of t-shirts sold, that's a complex question. Yeah, so you're right. The crux of this is in the post-industrial age that we're in, that so much of human endeavor is knowledge-based, and is the outputs, never mind the outcomes, but the outputs are intangible. Just taking that perspective alone then is productivity the right measure, never mind the fact that productivity is just such a thin slice of, I guess, life. In all its different dimensions.
And to provide another tangible example here, so we talked about contact centers a lot, or quite a few times on the podcast. So if we were looking at it from a purely productivity perspective, the measure would be how many calls would one contact center team member take in a day? Is that the right measure, or is the measure how many people have you actually helped? Because some problems might take 2 hours to resolve. Some problems might take 2 minutes to resolve. So is the person that's helping a customer through a situation that takes 2 hours less productive? That's the nuance that is missed when we talk about productivity.
Yes, and that's exactly what that example, the nuance that's missed, and the narrow kind of perspective and definition. When I see and hear politicians talk about productivity and proclaim it in their politicians' way that what we need to do is fix productivity, then it concerns me that either or both they and the people that who are hearing them taking their message about face value are really talking about we need to, for example, get call center people to answer more calls in a day, or t-shirt makers to make more t-shirts in a day. Whereas I think we have a slightly different, broader perspective on that's not always the right answer. And that's where my kind of ranty feeling about productivity can start to come in, is we just take a step back and look at the broader picture. And I remember going to see a man called John Seddon back in the UK. This is getting on 20 years ago. He's a systems thinking, you could call him a firebrand. He spent a lot of his career agitating in the public service sector in Britain, because a lot of the thinking at that time, the management thinking, was trying to make things more productive, and classically trying to get call center people to answer more calls because that was seen as more productive because it could be measured and it was easily measured. And John said, in his own way, helped them realise that wasn't the right measure because, as you've suggested, people who call in and get their call answered in the space of 30 seconds and they're off the phone within a minute, they might call back another 10 times to have another 10 1-minute conversations until a problem is fixed. And what the company's actually doing is creating a problem for itself in the form of, he called it failure demand. It's a form of waste. But what he explained was that the cost is in the flow, so it's in the end-to-end measure of things rather than in the transaction. And again, when we read headlines and see productivity being measured in a kind of transactional way, aka how much input and how much output, then it can lead us into the trap of measuring things and looking at things in those individual transactions, steps of a wider process, and even in a bigger system. So yeah, I think that it's really important to take a broader view and consider the outcomes maybe as well as the outputs and the systems that that things are all part of.
This is the broader, I don't want to say philosophical because it's not, it is actually a tangible conversation that I think needs to be had. It's something that needs to happen at a global level, this questioning of, and I'm not saying don't measure productivity, because, and I'll get on to this, because there's a big human motivation that's linked to productivity. It's redefining what we mean when we say productivity.
Yeah.
Where I'd like to really talk about or get into is talking about some of what the research says are the root causes of productivity.
Cool. Yes. Okay. I was going to say absence of or lack of productivity, but let's get into that. I think I promise my rant is over. I've got that off my chest now.
When I was doing some research, particularly for this episode, what I found interesting is when we talk about productivity, a lot of what's mentioned is at the individual level.
Okay.
We talk about how do we get individuals to be more productive. There's very little conversation about how could our systems or ecosystems or organizational systems, how can they enable more productivity?
There's a great quote from W. Edward Deming, who's seen as one of the originators of continuous improvement. He said, or it's attributed to him, a bad system will beat a good person every time. So yeah, it's all very well improving our own personal productivity, but we need to understand our context and understand the system that we're living and working and operating within. And if its conditions are contradictory to us being personally productive, then we're wasting our time.
And what I found in my research across multiple organizations now and across different parts of the globe is organizations are made up with very capable people that get very frustrated. And then we complain about the lack of productivity. So a lot of this information that I'm going to talk about here come from exit interviews, because that's been a pretty chunky part of research I've done or data that I've looked into. And there is this prevailing thing where people decide to leave an organization because they feel like, I am not having any impact here. They hired me because they thought that I could do X, Y, Z, and I could help them do these things. I've been here X number of years and I haven't been able to progress anything. And I'm paraphrasing here, but this is a common theme of what I'm hearing across the hundreds of exit interviews that I've analyzed. And what they allude to is things like organizational processes, decision-making processes, how things are funded. They all seem to have this effect of slowing down productivity.
Yeah, sounds familiar.
And as I'm looking at that data, that book Sludge, which I have a copy of here.
Oh yeah.
Casts us
it's almost within arm's length.
Sludge.
Yeah.
What stops us from getting things done and what to do about it. As I'm looking at this exit interview data and people are talking about it, I'm checking off what he talks about in the book about
Ah,
why are organizations very quick to go, right, how do we make our people more productive? But we don't talk about how do we make our organizational systems and processes more productive?
yeah, it is. There's jumping to I guess a conclusion or a point of view that it's the individual's fault that they're not being productive versus maybe more enlightened or actually a more productive organization has realized that the first step is not to look at the individual. The first step is to look at the environment or the system that they create for that the organization creates for the individual to work in. Yeah.
So if you've got an organizational process where you've come up with an idea of how to make something better, and then
Mm.
that idea has to go through 7 layers of approvals. You have great ideas, you have great potential, but the environment is stifling that.
Yeah. Because very few, if any, people still have that fire in their belly when they're asking for permission to do something for the 7th time or waiting for it to travel up through 7 different layers of the organization before coming back and being told, yes, you
Mm.
can, or yes, you can, but do this, or no, you can't. So, yeah, there's something. Humans, I don't think we're evolved for that kind of situation, are we? We're,
One of the fundamental things about humans, and this is what I said about productivity is an interesting thing, it's something we can just take out of
mm,
the equation because, so you've
mm,
heard of the progress principle,
absolutely. I love the progress principle. Yeah.
which basically says that we are intrinsically motivated when we make progress on something. Think about those days where you end your day having accomplished something, whether it's,
Mm,
I don't know, like right now I'm focused on writing a book. And
mm,
yesterday I have had this goal of writing 3,000 words a day.
mm,
Yesterday I wrote 3,500 words a day. And I wrapped my day just feeling amazing. So this is where what I'm saying about humans have an interesting relationship with productivity because we want to be productive. We want to make progress on things.
yeah.
And when we do, it's a self-reinforcing cycle because the more progress we make, the more we want to make progress, which
Yeah.
means that the
Yeah.
inverse is also true. So I've come up with a great idea. I've gone to my boss about it. My boss is going to go to her boss about it, and her boss is going to go to her boss about it. And it is going up this chain. And I'm sitting here waiting to hear about, can I move forward with this idea? And so at an individual level, I am not making progress. And what happens is I get demotivated. The individual starts to disengage, get demotivated. And what happens over time then is, why am I even going to bother bringing an idea to my boss? Because it's just going to go out into the ether. And so I'm just going to come
Yeah.
in, sit here, and do what I normally do.
Yeah. I'm not going to contribute, be engaged, think about how to solve a particular problem to make it better for everyone else, not be productive, in other words. Yeah. Just coming back to the progress principle, yeah, I love the progress principle. It's an amazing book from a wee while ago, but it still stands true. Teresa Amabile and her partner Stephen Kramer are the authors of that book. So using small wins to ignite joy, engagement, and creativity at work. I just thought I'd give a proper reference to that for our listeners who want to go and dig into that. Really powerful stuff. And thanks for bringing it up. It's interesting, Danny. Something for me to continue working on is this word productivity and just getting over myself, my hang up about this economic productivity and seeing politicians on news and on all the unintended harmful consequences of that and realize that actually there's a lot that I really have taken from and enjoy, such as the progress principle and W. Edwards Deming, that, like you said, help us at an individual level, but if we pay attention, can actually help us at this organizational level, which is where if you start getting the organization, the team, and the individual perspectives and lenses all lined up, then we start to see some magic happen in organizations.
The lift in productivity isn't going to come from telling people to be more productive. It isn't going to come from sending people off to a workshop or a class on being more productive.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
going to come from, as an organization, looking at what's the sludge we've created within our organization that prevents productivity from happening.
Yeah.
Because if we can actually get people moving, it's like the law of physics.
Yeah.
When the objects in motion stay in motion.
Yeah.
If we can create an environment where every day individuals feel, I'm actually doing something here.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you can solve for that, and again, it's twofold. It's not just looking at the individual, it's not just looking at the organizations, it's looking at both. That's where you're going to see the uplift in productivity.
So, yeah, that kind of finger pointing or standing over people and saying, just be more productive, or taking mechanical, functional kind of perspective on human productivity is just not fit for purpose in the post-industrial age. The other side of the productivity conversation is that we could be really busy all the time, but we could still be unproductive because we're busy doing stuff that doesn't actually contribute to our end outcome or output. It's not valuable activity. It would be waste, and we can waste even more time, energy that reduces our productivity, not increases our productivity.
Let's unpack that a little bit. We have to acknowledge that being busy is not the same as being productive. Being busy just means you're doing a lot of things.
Yeah.
My dogs spend a lot of time chasing their own tail. So they're very busy. Literally. So they're very busy dogs, but they're not really productive dogs. They're also puppies, so this is what they do. If busyness equated to productivity, those productivity charts would be just sky high, right? Because being busy is a badge of honor, and we're always trying to one up each other on how busy we are. But busy is not the same thing as productive. There is a socially acceptable norm that when we see people being busy, we assume they are productive. We assume they're working on something important, that what they're doing matters. I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but there is an assumption. What matters here, though, is to be productive, you have to be the right kind of busy. Productivity requires you to be doing the right things at the right time, at the right effort level. And what we are very deficient in is we don't reflect. And I know I've talked about this on the podcast before, but reflection is a very important part of being productive, because what reflection does is you go, what did I actually spend yesterday doing? Did that contribute to something? Because if I spent all day yesterday sending emails and responding to emails and jumping from meeting to meeting, I was busy. My calendar was full of meetings. But what is the outcome of that? What work has been progressed because of that? So reflection is a thing we need to do to be productive. The problem there, though, is we cannot reflect if we don't have clarity on the thing we're trying to achieve. And this is another thing that I have learned in my organizational research, is that most employees don't have clarity on what the goal is.
Yeah. Okay.
What is the thing I'm trying to contribute to? They can tell you their job title, they can tell you the team that they sit on, but most employees, and they acknowledge this, they will tell me, I actually have no idea what the purpose, what is the purpose? What are we trying to achieve here? Productivity requires having a clear understanding of what is the outcome we're looking for. Notice I said outcome and not output.
Yeah. And also, as per the earlier part of it, that what you were saying there, it's not how many hours am I busy for, how much activity am I actually doing, it's what's the outcome, what am I contributing to the outcome.
I'll share this example to shed a little bit of, I always like to use real life examples to bring some of the concepts I'm talking about to life. Several years ago, I was working for an organization, and I had a very clear picture of what I was hired to do.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes, because I was focused on that outcome, it meant that I would decline a lot of meetings.
Okay. Can I imagine where this is going, but keep going.
I got called out, and basically, I was told, you are not showing up to meetings. We need you to show up to meetings.
Uh-huh.
So I pulled up
Uh-huh.
my calendar and I said, okay, these are all the meetings that I get invited to. This
Yeah.
is when you hired me, you told me this is the outcome you want me to create. If I go to all
Yeah.
of these meetings, I don't have time to work on this. So have you hired me to
Mm.
go to meetings, or have you hired
Mm.
me to deliver this outcome? And even though
Yeah.
I was very clear about this in the conversation ended with, okay, we probably need to rethink about what meetings you're going to. But
Okay.
after the conversation, though, I still kept getting called out for not coming to meetings.
Huh.
I find this very fascinating because you've now acknowledged we've given you a very specific task to complete, and we are adding things to
Yeah.
your plate to get in the way of that. Okay, we understand that.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, can you come to this meeting? And I'm sharing this story because I don't think I'm alone in this. I think hearing this, lots of our listeners, and even probably you, Pete, you're like, yeah, this,
Yeah.
like, these
Yeah.
are things that have.
Very familiar. And actually, I imagine it's almost the default. It's almost, I would imagine, it's almost most people will be going, yeah, that sounds very familiar. It's a form of organizational madness, isn't it? Everybody, it's one of these things that everybody knows it's going on. Everybody acknowledges it's a problem, but it still happens. It's just a strange, I don't know, quirk of our humanness that we can't get over this.
But in that specific example, what it also creates is this impression that it's more important for me to go to all the meetings and show my face in all the meetings than actually getting the work done. And
Mm.
then we go,
Yeah.
and it felt like my compensation, my ability to move up in the organization, all of these things that are going to benefit me isn't in me actually delivering the thing that I was hired to do. It's actually in me showing my face.
It's very strange, isn't it? Yeah, it's a bit like, I don't know, an athlete, a tennis player, a footballer being expected to go to the press conferences and not actually play the game. So no, you're not, stay off the pitch. We need you to front up to this publicity shoots or the press conference. I wonder if that's something to do with in this, the fourth industrial age, where so much of our work is intangible, unlike an athlete. It's obvious that they need to be on the bike or on the tennis court or playing the game with their teammates. Whereas in our knowledge economy, because of what the outputs are often intangible, and also more importantly, the stages to get to those outputs are quite intangible, less concrete, and that's why we're in this kind of meeting trap that we don't see what we need to see.
Yes, absolutely. Because if I was sitting there making t-shirts, you can look up from your office and go, Donnie's at her desk making t-shirts. But in our modern world, Donnie might not be sitting at a desk the same location as you, so you can't lift up and look. But even
Mm-hmm.
if I was, you can't look up and go, right, Donnie is right now spending time on X task. You
Mm-hmm.
can't. You can't look at me sitting at my computer and visually be able to assess my level of productivity unless I'm sitting on my computer watching TikTok.
Yeah.
But even that, maybe I'm watching TikTok because I'm trying to get an idea or I'm trying to learn how to do
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
our world at the moment, it's much more difficult for managers and leaders to understand what everybody is working on. So I think the solution to that is let me call all these meetings so I could see you.
Yeah.
The other thing that I hear, and this will be familiar to you as well, is that I spend most of my days going to meetings to give an update on the work that I'm meant to be doing, but I haven't had a
Yeah.
chance to do because I've been going to meetings to talk about the work that I should be doing that I don't have to do
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I keep going to these meetings.
Madness. I think another contributing factor, another root cause, both in at each of these levels, actually personal, team, organizational, even national level, etc., doing too much, trying to do too much. If I think of the organizations I've worked in, and the reason for a lot of those meetings is, like you say, updates. And if you're a particular role in an organization, you're expected to do, let's say, deliver 6 initiatives in a particular quarter. You're going to go to all the meetings relating to those 6 initiatives. That's your kind of week on without actually making any progress on any of those 6 initiatives. And the same is true if in your own personal life. If you try to do too much, then you end up not doing anything because you're trying to spin the wheels, catching up with everything on your to-do list without
This
making
brings me to
progress.
another key
Yeah.
thing we need to focus on if we want to be more
Mm-hmm.
productive, and it is ruthless prioritization. And I know in other episodes I've talked about this framework I use called Now, Next, Later. And the reason I'm
Okay.
using Now, Next, Later is it doesn't put any date parameters in it. It is literally, these are the things I'm working on now. And when I am done with that, I'm going to work on this. And then when I am done with that, I'm going to look at what's in the later bucket. So everything, it's
Mm-hmm.
essentially, it's a Kanban board. But what it does is it keeps you focused. And I always advise people, for you as an individual, you should not have more than 3 things in your now bucket. If you are working on more than 3 big things in your now bucket, you are not being productive. And big things, right? Like, we all know that some part of our day is going to be devoted to admin work. At some point in the day, I do have to check my emails and make sure I'm responding to people. At some point in the day, I may have to have a meeting or talk to somebody. At some point in the day, I'm going to need
Yeah.
to take a break because I am human and I have human needs. So when I say 3 big things, is 3 big initiatives, 3 big projects, 3 big things that you're working on.
The old rocks analogy, your jar that you're going to put 3 big stones into, then some pebbles, then some sand. If you do it that way around, you'll get everything. Get more, be more productive. Yes, just picking up on something that you said and taking on us a little tangent around taking a break. And we have talked before in another episode or many about this idea of taking a break or resting, do things that on the surface seem to be not directly contributing to your productivity, like they're not actually directly working on something. That to me is at least part of the productivity equation. I use that the phrase rest is part of training, going back to the athlete analogy. As an athlete, you become better, you become stronger when you're resting, when you're not directly exercising. Your muscles recover and repair and get stronger. And I think definitely that if we can use that analogy in our knowledge work, our brains definitely benefit from switching off, taking a break, doing something different, and not focusing on the hard problem we're trying to solve or the piece of creative work that we're doing. Yeah.
This is another false belief about productivity, is that the
Mm,
longer we work, the more productive we
mm,
are. And that is just,
mm.
there is so much research that disproves that, yet it's the false belief that just won't die.
Yeah, yeah.
Because working more does not make us more productive. The reason that we have a hard time breaking up with that fallacy is that if we were making widgets, right? So
Mm,
back to the t-shirt factory, and yeah, if I was just sitting there and I was doing a repetitive task over and over and over and over and over again, more hours will
mm,
equal more productivity because it's a repetitive task.
mm,
But much of our work today is not repetitive tasks. And that's what makes
mm,
our work more intangible, more complicated, harder to measure, harder for leaders to observe,
mm,
which drives micromanagement behavior because it's not
mm,
repetitive.
mm,
Knowledge work generally isn't repetitive. Some elements of it are, but most of it isn't. And with knowledge work, more time on task does not increase productivity. And I would argue that it
mm,
decreases productivity because the more tired our brain is,
mm.
like, our brain is going to take a break when it takes a break, whether we give it the break or not.
Nice.
I've had these moments where I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, I am just going to sit here and figure this out. And I'm noticing that my brain is wandering, looking. And that's how I know,
Mm-hmm.
look, I got to get up and take a break because I could sit here and my mind is going to do this, or I can get up and do something, give my
Yeah.
brain a rest, and then I can come back to it.
Another kind of legacy hangover, if you like, from the earlier industrial ages when a lot of work was manufacturing, it was physically laboring. And even going back to the t-shirts and the manufacturing, actually, I think you will be able to perform a repetitive physical task and keep up the kind of pace for a certain amount of time. And then actually, I think most humans would end up getting slower and slower, less productive, making more mistakes because bodies are made up of our mind and our body. So a robot might be able to keep up the continuous production rate, but humans will eventually start to drop off.
I even question that
Um,
because at some
but yeah,
point
great
that
point.
robot's gonna need some maintenance.
Even robots, even robots need a rest and maintenance. So why do we expect humans to not? So yeah, we're getting a few good root causes here and pitfalls and traps that we accidentally fall into, and some blind spots that we definitely need to consider. One of I like to think about and explore and talk about this the relationship between the word productivity and the word creativity, because full disclosure, I used to see them as not quite opposites, but definitely in tension to each other. Whereas now I think I'm seeing them as more completely related. To be creative, you need to be productive. In our knowledge economy, our fourth industrial age, where so much of what we as humans can contribute, you need to be creative to be productive. If I can offer that as a, what do you think of that?
Well, my first thought is I think Peter and productivity need to go get some therapy.
I've been there. I'm getting through it. I'm finding some common ground that we can be best buddies.
I'm of course I am also teasing you a little bit because I think we all have these
Yeah.
concepts that we just have an allergic reaction to. Productivity and creativity they're like an infinity loop because creativity leads to productivity leads to creativity, so in my mind that's how that works. But for that loop to work, it has to exist in the right environment, because this is what happens. You've had this creative moment, you've seen something. I hate to talk about creativity having it as a burst because it doesn't. But let's say you've had some conversations and you've collected, you're hearing a pattern, and your brain goes, "Oh, what if we were to try this?" That is a moment of creativity. And then you go to your manager and you say, "Hey, you know how we're always talking about this problem? I had an idea. What about this?" Now, if your manager goes to you, "Hang on, let me run this through the 1800 approval processes we have to go through to get this idea going," that loop breaks because you're waiting, you're waiting, you're
Yeah.
waiting. But if your manager goes to you,
Yeah.
"Actually, let's give it a try. Let's experiment. Maybe we can try that on a small scale. Let's see what happens, and then we can socialize that and get a formal approval if it works." Then you're enabling that creativity to move into the productivity. We like
Yeah.
to separate these things and bucket these things. It's not like creativity lives here and productivity lives here. It's also, by the way, I know we tend to
Yeah.
talk about our brains as like these distinct parts,
Yeah.
but they're interconnected.
Yeah. 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 So it reflects how our brains are made. Going back to that productivity, I think in the past I've conflated, or because of what I've seen, or been pointed towards productivity with busyness, and I think that's where my kind of need for conversation and therapy about it comes from. But yes, so the productivity and similarly, I guess creative. One dimension of creativity is having ideas, but probably the more important dimension of creativity is actually bringing those ideas out into the world. And by definition, if our, let's say, the thing we want to create, coming back to the original definition of productivity, our output instead of t-shirts is, I don't know, music or paintings or drawing, things that are classically most people think of as creative, then we need to be productive to make those things actually real in the world.
You're given the space to progress the creativity, and that progression in creativity creates productivity. Now, we've talked today about this idea of organizations having layers and this idea of sludge slowing things down. For the extremist thinkers out there, I'm not saying that we don't need to have any controls in an organization. We absolutely do. What I'm saying is we need to look at because there are some places that we purposefully want to have some sludge to Sludge is very effective when we're trying to do things like protecting people's data. That slowing down of sending that email, make sure it's going to the right person, is an absolute great use of sludge. What I'm calling for is, are the things that we have in place in our organization, is it purposeful or is it there because it's always been there? And if we removed those, could we increase productivity, but do it in a way that we're not breaking regulations, we're not putting people in harm's way, we're not increasing the risk to our customers and employees, but it's being mindful of where we have some sludge and where we remove that sludge, because doing so will help us be more productive.
How do we, the same things that we unintentionally do that hinder either our own personal and our team and our organizational productivity, almost the exact opposite. So that happens because it's counter to our natural human behavior and our psychology, how we behave as humans, that if we flip that around, the same thing can actually make us more productive. They just seem they're counterintuitive because of what appears to have worked previously doesn't work anymore. I'm just coming back to the progress principle to make some of that a little bit concrete. The progress principle comes along with a set of kind of tools that we can look at our own productivity, our team productivity, our progress. Did we make progress in something that is meaningful to us today, tomorrow? And one of the research that Theresa Mabille did was work diaries, like some of the research you do. It's similar to the exit interviews, and they got people across many different organizations across many different parts of the world to record how they were feeling at work. And what they realized was that, this idea of making progress on meaningful work is the number one motivator, the number one thing that motivates people to keep going, not reward and recognition, not promotion, none of that. They're on the list, but the number one is making progress and meaningful work. So as a leader, manager, as an organization, if we pay attention to that, then we can actually unlock what seems to be a magic source of motivation, inspiration, and therefore progress, therefore productivity. And the opposite is, so if people did not make progress in meaningful work, then it slowed things down. They called the things that contribute to progress catalysts, and the things that contributed to what they called setbacks as inhibitors. And I won't go to them all, but one of the key ones that was changing plans. So management, let's call it that. So leadership or managers, let's say we're making progress on something as a team, but some decisions made somewhere else, and we're told to stop working on that thing, even though we're about to launch, say, a new product or make an improvement and about to go live, similar to sending ideas up and down the layers of the organization. If management put the brakes on something or decided that the thing wouldn't be launched, then that had a huge and disproportionate effect on people's, again, to borrow a phrase from Theresa Mabille, their inner work life. So the whole team's relationship and perspective on their work, the organization, how good they felt, how engaged they felt, was really set back significantly. Yeah.
So there was one of the most memorable exit interview moments I had. This organization was having a significant increase in resignation. So they brought me in to do exit interviews. And I started to notice this pattern of everybody was touching on this one project. After a couple, I asked in the next one, tell me about X project. And what this person said to me was, there was a team of that have been working on this now for a year. We did the customer research, and we really took a human-centered approach to building this thing, and we're so close to the finish line, and they've decided they're not going to do it. And I feel like they killed my baby. Those are the words.
Yeah, this is it. Yeah.
The other thing that they said is, they killed my baby and they didn't even tell me why.
Yeah. That's it. That is exactly it.
Maybe there was a really good reason that they had to stop that launch, but maybe share that with the team, because you've just killed their baby. And this is where we tend to struggle with, there's this saying like, oh, it's not personal, it's business, which I think is utter bullshit. because our work is
Mm.
personal. We take time away from our
Yeah.
families. Parents leave
Yeah.
their children to go do this
Yeah.
thing for a certain amount of time a day. It is absolutely personal. And we
Yeah.
go do these things for a certain number of
Yeah.
hours per day because we have to put a roof over our head. We have to put food on the table. We have to make sure that those children that we leave 8 hours a day are provided for. So it's absolutely personal. So when you
Yeah.
kill a project at work, it is personal. And if you want people to be motivated
Yeah.
and engaged and be productive, it has to be personal for them. I like to frame it in the other way because I think at the moment, we're very enamored by the robots, right? Like this whole AI
Mhm.
thing, we're very enamored by it. And I'm not dismissing it. It is absolutely amazing what AI can do today. And as time goes on, it's just going to blow our minds more and more. In that, we're starting to lose the honest of humans. Humans are incredibly capable, creative beings. True productivity is going to come when we can figure out how do we use technology in a way that helps humans be their best, right? So
Yeah.
how do
Yeah.
we use technology in a way that technology is doing the things that it can do best so that the humans can do what they can do best?
100% agree with that. And maybe, and so I've been thinking about that recently, and I've listened to some interesting conversations about AI, including one actually. It was an interview Adam Grant did with Sam, our open AI friend,
Men?
Sam Altman. Yeah, Sam Altman, and they did a really great dialogue conversation about AI, and Sam Altman was quite enthusiastic about the actual intelligence increasing and increasing. I've always thought that in a lot of non-productive situations in the workplace, that one of the root causes is where we've got computers trying to get computers to do things that humans are better at, and vice versa, getting people to copy and paste information from one screen and paste it into another, and that's their job kind of day in, day out. That's not really doing either of those things. But the whole idea of AI and the reality of AI, adding to the statement of let's get computers to do computer things best and humans to do the things that humans do best. Maybe the other word is enjoy. Let's keep something for ourselves. Let's not AI do all the things that we really enjoy doing and that we're good at doing. Let's not
Mhm.
outsource all of our lives and turn in. We could get dark and gloomy about it. But let's enjoy is the word I would use for AI. According to Sam Altman, it will know when it's enjoying doing something. So let's ask it, what do you enjoy doing? And let's ask ourselves as humans, what do we enjoy doing? What's meaningful and purposeful?
Should be what technology enables, right? Technology
Hmm.
should
Hmm.
enable us to spend more time doing the things that we enjoy. And I bring this back to the washing machine because technically, the washing machine, before the washing machine, we had to put in the effort to hand wash our clothes. And now that there is a washing machine, the machine does the work that should create more time for us to do something we enjoy. Now, that
Yeah.
hasn't worked
Yeah.
out
Yeah.
that, but
No.
maybe we can learn
Yeah.
from the failures of that
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
not repeat it with AI. But you're also touching on something that is important to also recognize. Another ingredient that is needed for productivity is good mental health.
Yeah.
People who are stressed, struggling with depression, struggling with anxiety, that does not bode well for product. Are we creating the environments where people can have good mental health? Or are we creating environments where people are stressed and anxious, and
Hmm.
because that doesn't bode well for productivity. We tend to think about things like mental health as I've seen a couple of job ads now talking about access to mental health care as a
Hmm.
benefit. To me, it's like a hygiene factor, but anyway,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um, good mental health isn't a nice to have. It's actually very integral to productivity.
Yeah. It's the starting point.
All right. So I feel like we've had a nice, meaty, meandering conversation. Should we do a little
Yeah.
bit of a recap before we get to
Yeah.
takeaways?
Let's do that.
So we started by exploring the definition.
Yeah.
We had a little debate around, does our measure of productivity need to be modernized? Because
Hmm.
we're still measuring productivity as if we all worked in factories making widgets. And what does a good measure of productivity look like in the knowledge economy? Then we had a twisty, windy conversation about enablers of productivity and
Yeah.
sabotages of productivity.
Yeah, or obstacles or detractors or yeah.
So just to mention a few of the things we talked about, when we're thinking about productivity or lack of productivity, we have to think about both at the organizational level and the individual, and examine the organizational context to see what sludge is preventing productivity. Then we talked about some of the myths around, we believe that working more hours is going to lead to more productivity. We talked about things like the importance of reflection, ruthless prioritizing, and the need for a clear understanding of the outcome we're working towards as being key to driving productivity. We talked about busyness does not equal productivity. Have I missed anything?
We touched on the progress principle. We came to that a couple of times. We also talked about, just this idea of a bad system will beat a good person every time. If you yourself or other people, if we're not being as productive as we could be, then start with what's the environment and system and then work your way towards the individual rather than the other way around.
We talked about the relationship between creativity and productivity, that they're not at odds with each other. We talked about the leader's responsibility. Yeah, I think that sums it up.
Yeah, nice summary, Dani.
So what are you taking away?
My takeaway is thanks for the conversation. That was always helpful for me to talk about productivity and on my journey. And just the reminder that my initial allergic reaction to this word productivity has probably been based on the busy rather than the actual productive. And also thanks for the reminder that the progress principle, one of my favorite books, pieces of research and toolkits, is directly related to this. So my takeaway is actually, I'm going to say that there's a personal progress diary that you can do. So you can reflections at the end of the day. You can go, what did I make progress on today? And if I did, then why was that? If I didn't, why was that? And that you can use it as an end of day reflection journaling technique, and it can help you identify where you've got enablers and where you've got some blockers. So yeah, I'm gonna have a little bit of a refresh of that and use that as a structure to kind of experiment, play around with that for a week or two, and see what patterns start to emerge. So thanks for that reminder. How about you, Dani? What takeaway do you had?
I love a good self-experiment. My takeaways, actually, I have one takeaway, and ironically, ours are related. It's actually to go back and read the book, The Progress Principle, because it's a very relevant book at the moment. I know it's a few years old, but perhaps looking more into the Progress Principle is a key to unlocking the more global view of productivity or the lack thereof. Right. I think that does it for us for this episode. Yeah. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Thanks for listening. Thanks, Dani.
Bye.
See you next time. Bye.
Next time.